Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elizabeth George, Director of Member Engagement and Chapter Development with the American Guild of Organists. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Musicians and Clergy Working Collaboratively. That is a joint presentation with the AGO and the Church. Before I introduce our first speaker, just a couple of housekeeping notes. This is being recorded, and probably within 24 hours, it will be uploaded onto our website. You will see under the Education tab, there is a sub-page called Past AGO Webinars and Supporting Documents, and you'll be able to find the link to the recording there as well as any handouts, and there probably will be accompanying handouts. Also, you are muted, but we do want to hear from you. Please use the Q&A button, that is the icon at the bottom of your screen, to post your questions. Don't use the chat box. We prefer for you to use Q&A. And that way, if we are unable to answer all of your questions, we can do so after this ends, and that also will be uploaded as a supporting document with the presentation. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the Executive Director of the Church Music Institute, Dr. Charlotte Kroeker.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for your generosity in facilitating this joint presentation with the Church Music Institute. And thanks also to Eric Burke, Eileen Hunt, and Eileen Gunther, who have spent time delightfully contemplating and planning how this time today might be well spent. CMI is also pleased to partner with the AGO in our common goals to support clergy and musicians for their work with congregations. CMI's online sacred music libraries and training for leaders of worship work in tandem with the musical professionalism of AGO to benefit all of us. One of the programs of CMI we will explore today is made possible by a grant from the Lilly Endowment, an effort that began in 2018 to benefit clergy musician teams and their congregations. Participants in the program include the pastor or priest, the primary musician, and both of these people are called Lilly Scholars, and a congregational representative in a project to inform, energize, and engage congregations in a vital worship life, using proven practices and, for the most part, resources already available to them. As Peter Marty would describe them, the Lilly Scholars want to learn from others and have a teachable spirit, a thirst for growing virtue, and a lifelong eagerness for feedback. The structure of the program consists of a year that begins with a music and Christian worship course, monthly peer learning groups with other teams, includes a project each team implements in their congregation with the congregational representative, and a congregational song course. The courses, designed by Reverend Dr. Paul Westermeyer, are offered through Bright Divinity School, either for credit or audit, and funding is provided for all expenses, as well as a grant to the congregation for their project. The outcomes are an education in the theology, history, and practice of church music, acquisition of a common shared language for the clergy and musicians, skills to integrate music in liturgy, and invigoration of congregational worship through education and use of gifts within the congregation itself. Today, we will see 3 teams from the 2018-19 cohort who finished projects that continue to benefit their congregations, 4 teams from the 2020-2021 cohort have only just begun. What all these scholars have in common is their fine training, their curiosity for interdisciplinary work, their commitment to congregational worship, and their servant leader hearts for ministry. If you would like to join them for the congregational song course this summer or apply for the next cohort, visit us at churchmusicinstitute.org. And now I'd like to introduce you to the people who make up the Lilly Scholars at the Church Music Institute, who are musicians and clergy working collaboratively. Here they are in their own voices and from their own contexts. Remember that if you have questions as you watch, you can use the Q&A function to ask them. Our first is Reverend Dr. James Hayner and Dr. Sam Etherton, who worked together at Zion Lutheran Church in Dallas, Texas. Their congregational representatives were Dr. Todd and Becky Bauman.
Greetings from Zion Lutheran Church and School in Dallas, Texas. My name is Sam Etherton, and my pastor is the Reverend Dr. James Hayner. Zion is a church with about 350 people attending each Sunday. It has a preschool through 8th grade day school with about 270 students, and it operates in the Lutheran tradition of a strong partnership between church and school. The minister of music teaches music in the school, and all students in the school are in a choir. The school children are also in weekly chapel services that use the liturgies and hymns from our church hymnal, Lutheran Service Book. In these ways, the school children learn how to worship in a way that is distinctly Lutheran. We wanted to educate the rest of the congregation by asking, why do we worship the way we do as Lutheran Christians? That question formed the basis of a weekly course that Pastor Hayner and I taught during the Bible class hour on Sunday mornings, over a 6-month period, and we met regularly to discuss and plan the classes. We titled the class, Worship, Where Heaven Meets Earth. We held the class from December through May, which is the festival half of the church year, beginning in Advent and lasting through Pentecost Sunday. Each session was designed as a standalone class, covering a single topic each Sunday morning. In this way, we felt that people who missed a Sunday would more easily be able to come right back and participate the next. Pastor Hayner and I designed the content for each class, and we provided a handout each week with an outline of the study for that particular day. Topics included seasons of the church year, what is the lectionary, baptism, the divine service, the choir offices, and many more. One of our goals for each class was to elicit participation from those in attendance, whether it was open discussion, people asking questions, singing, or sharing of experiences and memories. Each class began and ended with the congregation singing either a hymn or a part of the liturgy we wanted to highlight. We also spoke prayers together and allowed plenty of time for questions and discussion. Another goal of our class was for our people to become more familiar with our worship book, Lutheran Service Book. To this end, we purchased and gave away more than 60 copies to individuals and families for their personal use and study. At the end of the course, we planned a culminating event for the congregation. This was a traditional Lutheran hymn festival held on Pentecost Sunday. The theme was the church year. The hymns and choral anthems, along with the meditations written by Pastor Hayner, took the congregation on a journey through the life of Christ, from Advent through the festivals of Ascension and Pentecost. This time of singing, meditation, and fellowship was a satisfying conclusion to our 6 months of studying why we worship the way we do. We felt that our congregation participated well in the program, and they benefited from seeing pastor and musician working in tandem for the good of their people.
Reverend Lisa Musser and Glenn Stroh formed the initial team at St. Michael and All Angels in Dallas, Texas, an Episcopal church, a large Episcopal church in Dallas. I was privileged to serve as the organist for this project after there was a staff change. Although Glenn Stroh continued with this project, he was wonderful at writing the bulletin notes for the congregation, which they appreciated very much. The congregational representative for this project was Roland Anderson.
Reintroducing music into a spoken liturgy. The 7:30 a.m. liturgy at St. Michael and All Angels was a spoken service for 2 decades. The small but faithful congregation wanted music to return. The congregation valued their quiet, reverent service, so it was important to introduce music slowly and in ways that would not violate their respectful solemnity they treasured. To begin, hymn-based organ preludes, communion music, and postludes were added with an eye toward re-engaging their auditory memories of hymns. After 9 months, a meeting yielded consensus. The congregation wanted to continue music, and the singing of the doxology was added. When the singing of the doxology was successful, they wanted to sing more and believed they could sing familiar hymns. But what was familiar? A survey of 100 tuneful hymns determined which were familiar, somewhat familiar, or not familiar, from which a top 30 emerged. Organ preludes and postludes based on these tunes were included in the service with the singing of these hymns, along with information about the hymns and their connection to the scriptures and liturgy in the service bulletin. 6 months later, 2 choristers from St. Mark's School of Texas arrived, one a church member, the other an enthusiastic participant in the experiment. The boys supported the congregational singing and sang an offertory anthem each Sunday. Interest in the service increased. The choristers gave confidence to the congregation to sing more robustly. The congregation affirmed the boys as important leaders for worship. This community of worshipers was developing into a community of singers. Awareness of the value of music to worship emerged as it was experienced. The congregation named the important pieces of music: the organ, the choristers who assisted hymn singing and added choral anthems, and congregants noted the natural addition of music to their service. The bulletin notes were an important part of education about what was happening. An unexpected result. Now that the congregation knew its role in worship, they wanted skills and education in order to do it better.
Pastor Adam Douthwaite and Dr. Tim Shoemaker currently work together at Our Redeemer Lutheran Church in Dallas, Texas. Ann Eggold was their congregational representative.
Our Redeemer Lutheran is both a church and a school in Dallas, Texas. The church was founded in 1941 and has run a day school for over 50 years. The school currently serves approximately 150 students in pre-K through 6th grade. The church holds 2 services and Bible classes on Sundays and has an average attendance, pre-COVID, of around 250 people. For most of our history, the school has been an integral part of the church's mission. In the past decades, the two started to drift apart. Our Lily Project sought to bring the two closer together through the renewed use of Lutheran liturgy and hymnody in our day school.
The church participants were Adam Douthwaite, pastor, and Tim Shoemaker, cantor. In the project, Mr. Shoemaker chose and taught all hymns, and liturgical choices were a collaborative decision.
For much of the 19th and 20th centuries, Lutheran schools were primarily for the children of member families of Lutheran churches. Music and worship were a central part of the formative experience. Every Lutheran school teacher was required to pass a piano proficiency exam, and every day's activities would include singing hymnody.
In recent decades, however, the music training for our Lutheran school teachers has been dropped, and the robust music life has declined.
At the same time, our church's congregation saw a revival of liturgical worship and a renewed appreciation for our hymnitic and musical traditions.
This renewal in the church left the church and school in very different places. We felt that this was problematic because for Lutherans, and indeed for many denominations, music and liturgy are at the heart of our identity. We sing our faith.
To address this issue, we brought our church's hymnal back into our day school. There were 4 teaching areas and 2 main teaching components.
The first content component was our service of morning prayer or matins. We worked intentionally to make this our regular liturgy in day school chapels. We also use it several times every month in our Sunday worship.
The day school also has a hymn of the month. We teach this hymn to the school and also teach it in Sunday school and in Sunday morning worship.
Let's take a look at how we taught those components in the church and the school.
In the school's younger grades, we focused at first on teaching matins to the children. As the year progressed, they focused more on learning the new hymn for each month.
In 5th and 6th grades, the hymnody was taught as a combination of music and religion class. We looked up Bible verses, learned to sing the hymns with musical phrasing, and asked lots of interesting theological questions.
We have a music rotation in our Sunday school. Our hymn of the month was also taught in the Sunday school classroom. This gave us a chance to teach music as religious content.
In the chapels themselves, we put this into practice, singing our faith. All grades could participate joyfully in the worship life of the church.
And now we move to our current cohort of Lilly CMI scholars and start with the Reverend Dr. Stuart Baskin and Weston Jennings, who are from First Presbyterian Church in Tyler, Texas. Nan Hutchins Bailey is their congregational representative to the project.
FPC Tyler has a long history in East Texas and continues to be a diverse community of believers rooted in a compassionate faith. Our church just marked its sesquicentennial anniversary in 2020, and while its physical presence in Tyler has moved a few times through the decades, we are now located in the beautiful Brick Streets Historic District just south of downtown Tyler. Designed by architect Mark Lemon, our current sanctuary was completed in 1950 and shares a remarkable similarity with another design of his, Perkins Chapel at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. With its traditional Georgian architecture, both the interior and the exterior of the FPC sanctuary stand out in this small to medium southern city.
Our commitment to tradition does not stop at our walls, though, but rather permeates our worship within and throughout our entire campus. We strive for excellence in worship and music, recognizing the power they have to uplift and sustain our community of faith.
In comparison with other churches within the Presbyterian Church USA, we might be described as relatively high church, often with more formal liturgical elements drawn both from our centuries-old Reformed tradition and heritage, as well as other elements from the rich liturgical history of the larger Christian church. We generally follow the Revised Common Lectionary and observe the major liturgical seasons.
Our worship benefits from a robust music program anchored by the 80-plus stop Cassavant organ installed in 2000, as well as the sanctuary's wonderful acoustics, which allow choral, instrumental, and congregational music to really resound. Collegiality, mutual respect, and shared goals guide collaboration between the pastor and the director of music here at FPC. For those services which are part of our regular practice, such as the weekly service for the Lord's Day, we have drawn up a clear division of labor, but we do not hesitate to share new ideas with one another, which might have a positive impact on the service at hand. For services or events which are less routine, conversations are always the starting point, taking into account our objectives and the needs of the congregation.
One example of this is the creation of a new service at 9:30 a.m. on Sundays in the fellowship hall. We recognized a need from several younger families in the congregation for a service which would be at a different time and in a different location than the sanctuary, in order to minimize the risk of spreading COVID to older members of the congregation at the 11 o'clock service in the sanctuary. We needed to determine what was important about this new service and how we could accomplish this in a different space.
We are happy to report that this service has been well received and has also spurred new ideas and questions regarding the nature of our services in a post-COVID environment.
Now we will move from East Texas to Denver, Colorado, where Reverend Ann Scalfaro and Dr. David Farwig lead Calvary Baptist Church. Ann Comstock is their congregational representative.
Grace and peace to you. I'm Reverend Ann Scalfaro from Calvary Baptist Church of Denver. I've been on the pastoral team for over 12 years at Calvary and have served as the senior pastor for the last 8.5 years. Founded in 1881, Calvary is 140 years old and is located in southeast Denver. We're affiliated with the American Baptist Churches USA and are a predominantly Euro-American congregation, although not exclusively so, with multi-generational membership. Our vision is to be open to all, closed to none, as we seek to be a Christ-like community that experiences and shares God's love. Beyond worship, our key ministries include serving and housing those experiencing homelessness, sharing a covenant partnership with an African American congregation, being open and affirming of the LGBTQ community, and cultivating relationships and lifelong spiritual growth through small groups.
Hello, I'm Dr. David Farwig, and I've been the cantor and director of music at Calvary for the last 3 years. And I am delighted to be here with you and share how we, the pastoral and music staff, collaborate. Functioning as a team is key to how we work together, especially in worship planning. We meet every week for 2 hours. Our worship planning sessions include discussions on the scripture, seasonal themes, specific music selection, the gifts from lay leadership that we want to utilize in each service, and what we'd like the congregation to walk away with that day from worship, like a challenge, comfort, reassurance, a new way of thinking about things. Without this valuable exchange of ideas, we could limit our understanding of a theme, miss a more nuanced idea, or even create a disjointed worship experience. Also, we give priority to this time, not only to plan worship, but to fellowship, to be together, catching up, sharing the latest, laughing together. This fellowship is an integral part of our chemistry and trust as a team.
Our staff and congregation value multiple styles of worship: traditional, contemporary, and creative ritual-based experiences for healing and wholeness, liturgical holidays, and other special services, including an annual shared worship experience on Good Friday with the African American Church with whom we partner.
We value our lay musicians, and especially during this pandemic, we've included them extensively in worship. And we've augmented our musical pastoral care by adding a hymn request line accessible on our website and through our YouTube channel, and by sending audio recordings by text messages of hymns like Abide With Me, as a member waits during a loved one's surgery, for example. Our relationship as a staff team is supported by more intentional gatherings and activities too, including bi-weekly staff meetings, staff development sessions where we explore interpersonal relationships, communication, spiritual and other topics, and other group activities. Additionally, we look for opportunities to create new experiences for each other by switching roles, like having a pastor sing the doxology or play the piano for an offertory, and while I might preach or lead a meditation in a service.
One of the keys to the relationship that David and I share is our mutual respect for the other's field. He has a strong interest in theology and questions of faith, and explores those in part through participating in small groups, including a weekly prayer and study group that I lead. And I have a musical background and understand aspects of choral preparation and hymnody. This, along with our shared pastoral concern for our congregation and for one another, deeply enhances our ability to create meaningful worship for Calvary.
Now we'll move from Denver, Colorado, where there's lots of snow right now, back to East Texas and Kilgore specifically, where Reverend Will Wilson and Gayla Strunk are the leaders at First Presbyterian Church, and where Ryan Griffin is the congregational representative for their project.
COVID-19.
I'm Will Wilson, pastor of First Presbyterian Church since 2018.
I'm Gayla Strunk, and I'm the organist choir master at First Presbyterian in Kilgore since 2018. COVID-19 quarantine closed the church to in-person worship. Those in the congregation expressed their need to be at church. They missed hearing Advent music and the Advent message. Will and I met, and we decided on 4 Psalms of hope for music and meditation, one for each week of Advent.
The beauty of the Psalms is that they give the people of God the language to express longing and hope for the Emmanuel to come among us in our midst. And in a time of quarantine and social distancing, one of the ways that we decided to build community is to send out these devotions so that we might have a shared experience of worship. A great resource that guided us as we thought through the particulars of this project was Martin Tell's Psalms for All Seasons. It helped us pick the particular psalms that we used, Psalm 74, 96, 42, and Psalm 24, and it was valuable in helping us figure out which hymns corresponded with the particular psalms that we used.
I chose meditative organ music and piano music to illustrate the message of these psalms and these hymns. I used an uplifting dance-like rhythms of Comfort, comfort ye my people, to express the gaiety and the happiness of the promise of the coming of the Lord.
This particular project was a collaborative effort from beginning to end. Gayla and I work well together, and we both work with the conviction that it is beneficial for the church as a whole when clergy and musician are able to work together. I believe when that happens, the entire congregation is able to flourish and excel. These 2 photos are screenshots of one of the videos that we emailed out to the congregation during Advent, and I believe that they capture the essence of our particular role as worship leaders. We each have our own role, but when we come together, it is one harmonious experience of worship and glorifying God.
Here's a picture of the beautiful stained glass window, and underneath it, the famous Anshimad trumpet that is actually the first horizontal Anshimad trumpet installed in the United States. This is an Aeolian Skinner Opus 1173, 77 ranks.
This is a wide shot of the sanctuary of the First Presbyterian Church in Kilgore, Texas. The building was constructed soon after the oil boom in the early 1930s. It was completed in 1939. The beauty of this space points our hearts and our minds toward the greater beauty of God who dwells in our midst.
And you will see all of these people in our panel that's just about to begin. And joining us in the panel is the final team who is in the 2021 cohort. They are Reverend Greg Dahl and Dwayne Condon from Norotan Presbyterian in Darien, Connecticut. And Suzanne McGraw is their congregational representative. You'll hear from them as well. Now it's my privilege to introduce my good friend, Dr. Eileen Gunther, who is the former president of the American Guild of Organists and professor emerita of church music at Wesley Seminary, who will facilitate our panel discussion. Thank you very much, Eileen. All yours.
Thank you, Charlotte. And Charlotte and I have so much in common. We have sort of concentric circles, really. But our two books, The Sounds of Our Offerings, hers, The Sounds of Our Offerings, Achieving Excellence in Church Music, was really helpful to me when I wrote my book, Rivals Or a Team, Clergy-Musician Relations in the 21st Century. So this is a subject that we're both very passionate about. And all of us who've worked on this webinar appreciate the opportunity to engage with our panelists on some subjects that are particularly pertinent to today, some of which have already been addressed a little bit, but maybe we can dig into those a little deeper. The challenges of this last year have been unlike any we have encountered, and I know the creativity of these folks has probably been stretched as all of our creativity has been in this last year. Reverend Scalfaro and Dr. Farwig, can I ask you the first question? How has the pandemic provided opportunities for clergy and musicians to plan worship together in new ways?
Thank you, Eileen. Well, everything about worship in the pandemic has been new, so it has been all opportunity. And I think one of the things we discovered is that we were live streaming before the pandemic, but creating worship primarily for those in the sanctuary. And if those happened to be on vacation or maybe tuning in from home, they were sort of looking in on the experience of those in the sanctuary. When we moved to pre-recorded worship, which is what we continue to do as we get to the end of the pandemic, we realized we're creating a worship experience for those worshiping from the home. So how do we make that experience as personal and intimate as possible so that they're not only able to connect to God, but to be able to really connect to one another? So a couple ways that we've explored that creatively in worship planning is thinking about our camera angles, our set, if you will. Where are we recording? What aspects are in the sanctuary? What might be in front of a painting? What might be outside? I preached a sermon on Jonah and the big fish, and my benediction was at a lake with my golden retriever jumping out as I gave the benediction. How might we involve congregation members? So Palm Sunday, having them all send in videos of them waving branches in their yards, or Pentecost, having them wear red and dance or wave, and incorporating these parades virtually, if you will, to involve that engagement. So it's really been thinking about almost the screen as a sacred space, and how do we create that connection? And David will talk just for a minute about how we've done that with music.
Thanks.
Thanks, Anne. Yes, one of the biggest challenges we faced was, of course, losing our choir. Choir was the primary musical source in the live service. Most of the choir is probably over 50, and many of them were not necessarily willing to take the time, or didn't have the time to really dive into the technology of virtual choir production, which is very complex, requires technology that was beyond most of us. So what I was tasked with is creating music that experience that was worshipful and spirit-filled, but yet intimate for this screen space. And one of my goals was to involve lay musicians as much as possible. We're blessed with a large collection of lay musicians in our congregation, and they were very willing to do experiments and to try all sorts of wonderful creative things with us, including multi-tracking up to 4 or 5 voices with certain singers, bringing in instrumentalists, some of the youth with their drumming and trombone playing, all sorts of these kind of things. And then one thing that I had to do as cantor is because I lead all the hymns and all the service music, is bring in my guitar because we were not meeting in the church. And I got to really improve my guitar skills at that point. So it was just a great variety and constant challenge to bring this sacred space on the screen, but yet really involving a lot of the lay musicians.
Well, that's great. And you mentioned something that I think is probably important for us to mention at the very top of this panel, which is that the amount of work for people to go to, both the individual singers as well as the people who might be deciding that they want to be doing the editing. I have friends who have done this, and it's basically an hour a minute of work. So if you've got a 5-minute piece, you've got 5 hours. Now, depends on how many folks you've got and how good you are at it, but it still is way more work than I think a lot of folks realize. So thank you for allowing us to say that. Our next question is for Reverend Dahl and Dwayne Condon. How will the pandemic change how clergy and musicians view their vocations to serve their congregation?
I'll jump in there. I think we have begun to realize that our congregation will no longer simply be made up of those who are going to be attending in person. And there are those who now see themselves as part of our congregation and are communicating to us. In fact, I have in front of me a couple envelopes that I received in the last 2 days from people who have sent in their offerings to us, who are from different parts of the country, who have no connection to the church, who somehow found our church online and have begun worshiping with us. I have another letter from someone who wants to talk to me about our statement of faith, wants to know more about us because he and his family have been worshiping with us online. So we were doing this, we had a virtual service before the pandemic. We had an online service. So there wasn't a huge learning curve for us in that regard in terms of live streaming, but now we're far more cognizant that we do have a virtual audience. And how do we continue to engage them? And how do we continue to minister to them? And how do we continue to serve them?
Yeah, I think we're finding out that kind of in general, the church in the broader sense has been dragging its feet in this technology and this opportunity to get the gospel out there, because it's hard to do. It takes an investment of resources and time. And Greg and I are on the same page. It's like this has turned out to be a real silver lining in this pandemic, is that we're reaching out to people that we haven't before, and even our congregants. But we live in an area where these people really like to travel on weekends, or they're heavily involved on sports. But now we're finding that they're still worshiping with us, still able to feel like they're part of the church. I was wanted to say one thing that David was talking about, and the intimacy of that. We had an interesting kind of combination of the way our congregants felt about how we were doing it. Some of them didn't want it to be intimate. They wanted to feel like they were in church. So basically all they wanted was a wide shot. of the church. And I think a lot of that came down to the fact that they weren't able to be in the building, and they missed the space. And so they wanted to see as much of the space as possible. But we've done a kind of a combination of that. And Greg and I and the other two pastors, we're in constant conversation about how do we do this? How do we do it better? What do we need to do to really serve the needs and to get the gospel of Jesus out to as many people as we possibly can?
Thank you. For our next question, Dr. Baskin and Weston Jennings, I'm wondering if you would talk about what models of clergy-musician working relations have shown particular strength during this time.
Weston, you want to go first, or shall I?
I'll let you go first.
Okay. I think the first thing about our model is, and this is, you can't fake this stuff, is we happen to like each other, and we happen to respect each other's professionalism, knowing that we both bring things to the table that the other doesn't have. But I've got a little bit of musical background, and in his musical training, he's learned some theology. So we have a common language that we can bring to the table. For me, I'm aware that worship without really good music is thin, and so I know I have to rely on a really good quality musician like Weston. We're generationally very different. He's the same age as my older child, but age at a certain point doesn't mean a whole lot. He's got all kinds of skills. I think of him as kind of an old soul. He brings a lot of wisdom to the table. So I think the model is, first of all, we enjoy each other's presence, we like each other, and we respect what the other does, and don't feel like we have to, tell the other what the other has to do very much.
Thank you for those many, many kind words. You're certainly too kind. I would echo all of that. There are two things that also put extra pressure on us as we went through COVID and highlighted the way our relationship works and how it functions, and really forced us to re-examine some things. Is that we also had an associate pastor who during that time left us to take on further studies, graduate studies. And so at that point, we had to think really hard about what were they bringing to this as well, and how can we take on those responsibilities in addition to everything else during this time. I really appreciate the fact that when I have a new idea, I can bring it to the table and we can talk through it. There's one instance pre-COVID where we had a service of evensong for Christ the King. And this is something that we hadn't done, but a celebration that I really wanted to highlight in the liturgical year. And between the two of us, with ideas of music and liturgy and bringing this service that is so common in other traditions, bringing this to ours and really talking about how can we make this really instilled in our tradition, as well as just making it a beautiful liturgy filled with music and meaning. So it's really fun to work together and to work through these projects and bring them to fruition with such a wonderful partner.
Thank you both. Charlotte, those are echoes of your book, aren't they? Our next question, if Dr. Hayner and Dr. Etherton would tell us about what basic assumptions do successful clergy musician teams bring to the table that serve them well over time?
Thank you, Eileen. I'll jump in here, Pastor Hayner, and you can feel free to come in if you want to. I think one of the main things for the pastor and the musician to have in common is their philosophy of music. Of course, it sounds very basic, but for a musician and a pastor not to see eye to eye on what music means in the service is the proverbial recipe for disaster. Having frank conversations about the role of music in the Lutheran Church, it's pretty commonly held that the music is the handmaiden to the gospel. It preaches the word just like a sermon can preach, in a little different way. And so, having that common philosophy of what music does in worship will solve a lot of problems. So it's really, I guess it shouldn't be an assumption. It's something that needs to actually be talked about and come to the surface between pastors and their musicians so they are on the same page, because I think that affects their personal relationship also, the way they work together. If they're set on the purpose of music in the service, then everything sort of flows from there, I think.
I'd like to make two observations about Sam and seeds that he planted. I'm retired, so I'm not actively involved in the process right now. But since Sam left after our project and went to Wisconsin, and together with the COVID, we've had to change things a lot. But we do have live worship, and the seeds that Sam planted in the relationship with our senior pastor, I think you can really see that, because to the average observer, nothing really has changed. Their relationship, that foundation was firmly set in place. So it's the credit to parish musicians like Sam and our senior pastor that if you lay a good foundation, even during trying times, it will still have its rewards and its fruit. The other thing, the observation is, when the pandemic came, we went to a video type of service, and rather than just videoing our in-church service, the design was made to be that this would be observed in the home, something special, not just replicating the public worship service. And Sam is influenced, particularly with one of our teachers, not the pastor, but one of our teachers on staff that has skills in this, have really come up with, I think, a good 20, 25-minute format that a lot of people have told me that they really appreciate. So as I observe the legacy that Sam left for us at Zion Dallas, his relationship with the senior pastor, his relationship with other colleagues on the teaching staff, when you have those good relationships and you plant solid foundations, even trying times will not throw you for a loop.
Can I say amen? Our next question, Reverend Wilson and Gayla. I'm wondering, what does the congregation view the task of clergy and musicians the same way that clergy and musicians see their own tasks?
Yeah, that's a great question. From what my sense of the congregation is that I would say for Kilgore, for First Pres Kilgore at least, they do. And I think that's in part because Gayla and I work hard to present a clear and united front in what we're doing in worship and what our purposes is, and what our goals are. And so, for example, in our meeting with our elders, we call it the session. Gayla and I will often give a report about some of the upcoming things we're going to do in worship. And I think by presenting sort of the united front that we're a team, that our task is to not be, sort of providing an entertainment service, but a worship service. we're very clear about that, both with ourselves and with the congregation, that our role is to not feed people's desire to be entertained, but to cultivate a worship experience where we worship the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Thank you.
Gosh, I don't know what to add to that. We do work very well together, and I think the congregation can see that. They're very supportive of what we do, and it shows. It's I think the congregants are thrilled that we do what we do. Very supportive, so I'm grateful for that.
And we like each other too.
That too. Yeah.
Makes a difference, doesn't it?
It does.
Moving to our last question, Pastor Douthwaite and Dr. Shoemaker. What common resources, books, planners, inspirational resources feed your work together? And maybe a slightly more personal question, do you worship or pray together?
Yes, thank you. Our short answer is the lectionary, which makes life easy for us. And so I plan music based on the lectionary, and the pastors preach on the lectionary, and it makes things run smoothly. A couple of years ago, we switched from using the Common 3 lectionary to the historic 1-year lectionary. And we found that in that case, all of the propers for the day and the readings are more thematically tight than they were in the 3-year, which made it even simpler. And so I can go into the lectionary for that day and pick music to match. And generally, we don't miss each other in terms of theme for the day. So there's a couple of assumptions there that we're working with. One is that I, as the musician, am going to take the time to go through the scripture readings and make sure that the music does line up with that. And the second is that the pastors will let me know if they're going to pick something that's a little more on the tangent, a little more on the edge of what the theme is for the day, and let me know so that I can rearrange the music.
Great. Anything else to add?
Something else we also talked about was the length of time that we have been able to work together. It's been about 7.5 to 8 years now, and that really does help. We know each other. We have similar upbringings and theological education, so we're on the same page, which is very helpful in terms of planning and things. In terms of worshiping and praying together, we do pray together at our weekly staff meeting. That's a very valuable time of coordination and being able to share that time together. Worshiping together, we're usually both in our, he's up in the organ loft and I'm down front. With our midweek services in Lent and Advent, it's a little more intimate, and Tim gets to sit down in the pews and get to hear the sermon, and we're closer to the piano. So I guess that's about the extent of our worship and prayer time together.
Well, thanks to each of you. You really are emblematic of a successful team, and I know that you've learned a lot from the program you're in, and all of us, all the 300 some people that are listening, I know have learned something from you and appreciate your time of sharing here. So thank you very much. And now I think we turn it to Molly and some questions from those who are listening. Is that right?
Correct. So we have, just a few questions. So for the panelists, do your churches all have computer or communication staff that help you implementing all of these wonderful programs?
Anyone jump in on this?
I'll take a stab at that first. We do not have a designated communications director, as many churches do. But what we did with the quarantines and the programming stuff that was sort of put on hold because we couldn't gather, we had our director of Christian education, and his job responsibilities shifted and 75% of his time was making the videos and doing the edits and he really came through for us on that. And as someone said earlier, I was surprised by how much time is involved in making a very short video. When we were doing our Advent devotions, a 5-minute video could take him 6 or 7 hours to get together and to look well and all of that. So I'm really grateful for his work and his willingness to sort of shift his job so that we could minister to our people. And I feel for the churches who rely on volunteers. And I know that there are volunteers out there who've really stepped up to the plate, but it's been a challenge and an opportunity at the same time.
All right. So moving on to the next question, what would you all suggest for enhancing or developing the importance of a shared ministry, this trust and collaboration?
Anyone take a stab?
Yeah, I'll go ahead since I talked about it. There's some of it just depends on chemistry, honestly. But even beyond chemistry, there surely are ways that clergy and musicians can work together to develop that relationship. But really, they both have to want to make that relationship work, and both have to see the relationship as not only mutually beneficial, but as beneficial and important to the congregation. And if one or the other doesn't see the importance of the quality of that relationship, I think it's probably going to be pretty hard to change the dynamics of it.
One practical suggestion I have on that real quick is just to maybe connect on something that's not worship related. So our staff does a lot of spiritual direction together using the Enneagram, and that's just one tool. I mean, there are all kinds of tools you can use, or a book you could read together that nobody's preaching on or no one's preparing music for, just to develop that relationship. So you kind of bringing in you bring in a third party, a therapist, you bring in a third tool, like a book or a different resource to connect over.
Molly, I've been looking at the questions here. Can I jump in with one that seems to be recurring in this thread here, which is how far ahead do you plan? Because that's like a perennial question. And I think it would be helpful to have your responses, maybe even a bunch of you.
Can I jump in first?
Please.
So I will plan hymns in a cycle of a year. And then I'll plan choir music from there, maybe 6 months out.
Anybody else? We're running short on time, but I think just spitting out.
Yeah, I plan same as Tim. I usually, in pre-COVID, I planned usually seasonally from the beginning of the program year to Christmas, and then about halfway through that, I planned for the end of through Easter and the end through Pentecost. But now for worship services, I think we're about a month ahead. It's just a little trickier with this type of, with the virtual, but about a month ahead.
Thanks. I think
I'd
that's
like
helpful.
to highlight a question that I thought was really, really good. How do we put the fire under clergy to get them excited to work together? We have 3 priests and 2 deacons, and rarely do we even discuss liturgy.
I think I'll jump out there and say, if you feel like you have to light the fire under clergy, it's probably not likely to happen. Just to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. I think that's a deeper issue, that there's something major that needs to be addressed.
Because at the end of the day, if clergy I'll address it from the clergy end. If clergy don't see musicians as full partners in the enterprise, that's a hard nut to crack.
They should have another profession if that's the attitude. They should do something else.
This is kind of a commercial for Church Music Institute. This is exactly some of the projects that we're doing, and the whole Lily Scholar Program is designed to try to get some models out there, and hopefully some other people will pick up on it. And I have a grandson in the seminary right now, and I've already had him one time to Church Music Institute just to make them aware that this world exists. So person by person and program by program, you don't give up on it. You keep working on it.
And maybe the other thing is, and Pastor Hayner, I think that you brought up something important, and that is find a shared project to start with, and then let that be and I think Ann Scalfaro kind of alluded to that as well. You find a common project and then use that to build the relationship from.
All right, next question. For those who teach hymns and liturgy to students in the school, did you have any pushback from those who think that kids only like contemporary Christian music?
Well, I can jump in there. No, we haven't. Our church is pretty, the culture is pretty established as far as it being a hymnal-based church. And so we typically use the hymnal as the source for all of our chapel music. And we do a hymn of the week even, and a hymn of the month. So we're teaching in the classrooms a new hymn each week, and then one hymn that we spend a little more time on each month. And just looking back over the past several months, you know, the number of hymns we've gone through, and the kids is just part of what they do. So like I said, it's part of the culture. And so no one really expects anything different. And I know it takes time to develop that culture. It doesn't happen automatically. It just takes, it takes time.
I'm not aware of any pushback either. Tim can correct me on this, but as far my understanding is that the kids really enjoy the liturgy and the back and forth, and maybe Tim can speak more to that.
Yeah, I think once you've had the opportunity to teach quality hymnody to children, they will enjoy it, and you can build on that. One short anecdote: I had the poster board that I made last year with the beginning of our Matin service, back and forth. And I would pick a different student each week to lead the leader part on that. And with COVID this year, we haven't really met to go through that service. But a couple of weeks ago, I brought it back with the first graders. And there's one first grade boy who hadn't paid attention to a thing I'd said all year. And as soon as I brought that poster board in, he said, "Oh, I love that." And so I think once you get the chance to really teach that with kids, they start to respond.
And next question, we are a diocese of mostly small parishes. We are starting to explore how we might leverage the worship and music talents across the diocese. Do you have any thoughts on how to maximize the success of this?
I might like to answer that one to that person. Off screen, I realize that we're getting close to the end of the time here, but I could answer that question later if we have a chance to do that. And maybe there will be some others who would have an answer. That might take some time to answer, but I have some ideas.
We're definitely going to collect all of these questions, and they'll be with the handouts and the link to the video up on our website. So for those who we were not able to answer, rest assured, I will share these with our panelists, and get their input. Eileen, any final thoughts?
Just deep appreciation for all the work that you all have been doing, and for Charlotte's inspiration through the amazingly creative work that she's doing. And can I put in a little plug, Charlotte, for choral music and organ music that you've so graciously received? I have sent her many boxes. My mom was a church musician, and they have been so gracious at CMI to receive those. So I don't know if you need any more or want any more, but it certainly is a place that that I feel really great about having made that connection.
Thank you. Well, speaking of Church Music Institute, I don't know how many of our AGO members know that they can save $40. The Church Music Membership Institute is $75, and they can save $40 on this. We have a wonderful collaborative program, and they will have access to sacred library music, 18,000 choral selections, and over 13,000 organ compositions. So the way that you do this, and again, this will also be a handout, is you have to log on to OnCard and just update your personal information there, and you will see an opportunity to join. Well, I just want to close by thanking all of our wonderful Lilly Scholar panelists today. This was such a great webinar. Bravo, thank you to all. And of course to Dr. Charlotte Kroeker with CMI, and to Dr. Eileen Gunther, our past AGO president. And a special thanks to Molly for helping moderate the Q&A. And last, but certainly not least, he has remained behind the scenes, but Eric Burke has done, there he is, has done such an extraordinary job of linking these presentations together that he really does. Thank you for your round of applause. He has really done a wonderful job. So with that, I'm going to say thank you again. It was wonderful to have you with us. Give us 24 hours, and the recording, the handouts, everything will be uploaded onto our website. We'll send the link out. And I will end by wishing everyone a very happy Passover and a happy Easter. Stay safe and stay well.